The gravel crunched softly beneath the tires as Errol Musk steered the aging sedan into the familiar driveway of their summer home at Seasons Lake. The house stood just as it always had, modest, draped in ivy, its wooden panels weathered by years of sun and storms. It welcomed them with the quiet dignity of a place that had held a family's laughter, arguments, silences, and so many unspoken things. Errol turned off the engine, but made no immediate move to exit. His hands lingered on the steering wheel, his gaze caught on the shimmer of the lake just beyond the trees. "It's smaller," he murmured, almost to himself. Maye, sitting beside him, offered a soft smile. "No, my love, we're just older." Inside, the house seemed to sigh with their arrival, as though the walls themselves remembered. Dust motes floated lazily in the shafts of sunlight that crossed the wooden floor. Everything was as they had left it last year, the old clock still ticking with stubborn determination, the faded curtains gently stirring in a breeze, the photograph of their children, Elon, Kimball, Tosca, perched above the stone fireplace. But something else hung in the air now. A stillness. The spaces once filled by small feet, loud voices, the slamming of doors, were now softened by time, distant echoes lingering like the scent of pine in the walls. Errol sighed heavily as he lowered himself into his favorite chair, his joints protesting with a stiffness that was becoming harder to ignore. "Funny how places remember more than people do," he said, tapping his temple with 2 fingers. "Mine's starting to betray me." Maye, graceful even in her 60s, set down their bags and crossed the room to him. She cupped his weathered face in her hands, her touch light but steady. "Not betrayal, darling. Just a bit of forgetfulness. Happens to the best of us." His lips twitched in an attempt at a smile, but didn't quite reach his eyes. "A convenient lie. I'm losing pieces of myself, Maye, slipping away like leaves in that lake." His voice dropped, rough with the bitterness he could no longer fully hide. "I'll be gone soon enough. The lake can keep my memories. I'll have no use for them." Maye refused to let his words linger in the air. She sat beside him, tucking her legs under her, resting her hand on his. "Then let's make new memories while we can." His gaze drifted to the window, to the shimmering waters of Seasons Lake. It had been their sanctuary for decades, a place where life paused and softened. They had brought the children here when they were young, taught them to swim in these waters, watched fireworks from this very porch. The lake had witnessed their joys, their losses, their growing distances. Errol stood slowly, moving toward the bookshelf, running his finger along the spines. "Can't see these damn titles anymore," he grumbled. "The words swim like fish. And when I do manage to focus, I forget what I just read." "You still remember the way to the lake, though," Maye offered with quiet encouragement. "Take a walk tomorrow. Clear your head." He scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "I'll get lost in these so-called smart paths. Probably some app tracking my every step. I don't trust any of it." His aversion to technology had only grown sharper with age. The smartphone Elon had gifted him last Christmas sat untouched on the mantel, its screen dim, as though exiled. He missed rotary phones, maps made of paper, conversations that weren't punctuated by glowing screens. Their son's name slipped uninvited into his mind, and perhaps into the air. "Elon's coming soon." "Yes," Maye said, her tone carefully warm, like a bridge she was trying to build without scaring the other side away. "It'll be good for you too. He's made the effort. That means something." Errol's expression hardened. "Effort, huh? He comes with his noise, his headlines, his conquests. I wonder if there's still a boy under all that armor." Maye's eyes softened with a mother's unshakable faith. "There is. I see him, even if you don't." Later, while Maye unpacked in the quiet of the upstairs bedroom, Errol found himself drawn to the old photo album resting on the low coffee table. His hands, once steady and strong, now trembled slightly as he flipped through the heavy pages. Snapshots of another lifetime. Elon as a boy, his eyes bright with curiosity, his fingers stained from dismantling radios. Kimball grinning with grass-stained knees. Tosca wrapped in Maye's arms, her hair wild and free. There were photos of him, too. Younger, taller somehow, his arms firm around his children. His memory of those days was already blurring, but the emotions clung stubbornly to the edges of his heart, some sharp with regret, others soft as a well-worn sweater. Outside, the lake shimmered under the descending sun. Its surface caught the light like glass, and yet Errol knew its depths. He knew how easily something precious could vanish beneath its calm exterior. A shadow flickered across his face, a fleeting thought, unwelcome yet persistent. Would he grow old here, forgotten? Would his memories, like the photos, fade to sepia until no one remembered the man who once laughed, once loved, once mattered? He pressed his hand to his chest, feeling the uneven beat, the slow but steady march of time. Maye's voice drifted from the staircase. "Come sit with me on the porch. The light's beautiful right now." He rose, his knees stiff but his resolve intact. "All right," he called back. "Let's watch the lake remember us." As they settled into their rocking chairs, the scent of pine and lake water filled the air. They sat in silence, the kind of silence only possible between two people who have spent a lifetime learning each other's rhythms. Dear viewer, I'd love to hear what this first part stirred in you. Did it remind you of a place, a season, someone you once sat beside by the water? If it touched you, if you'd like to follow where this story gently leads, you're warmly invited to stay with us. A simple like or a quiet subscription would mean the world, not because it's expected, but because stories like lakes are best when shared. Errol Musk awoke to the soft rustling of pine trees swaying outside the bedroom window, their tall silhouettes leaning gently toward the lake as if whispering secrets he could no longer hear. The morning light, once a welcome friend, now felt like an uninvited guest. 80. The number echoed in his mind like the steady ticking of a clock he could no longer rewind. He sat on the edge of the bed, his breath caught between reluctance and resignation. His fingers, stiff and reluctant, moved across his wristwatch, a gift from Maye decades ago, its hands still moving forward, oblivious to his growing desire to stop time altogether. Downstairs, the comforting clatter of dishes and the faint aroma of cinnamon drifted through the house. Maye's familiar rhythm. She had risen early, determined to soften the weight of the day. When he finally descended the creaking staircase, he found her in the sunlit kitchen, setting out his favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs just the way he liked them, thick slices of toast with apricot jam, and a small bowl of fresh blueberries, a quiet nod to summer's past. "Happy birthday," she greeted him, her voice warm, carrying an almost childlike excitement. "80 looks good on you." Errol grunted, waving a dismissive hand as he eased into his chair. Don't know why everyone makes a fuss about getting old. It's not an achievement. It's just endurance. Maye slid a small gift toward him, a pocket-sized leather journal, the kind she knew he liked, though he rarely wrote in them anymore. It's not a fuss. It's a moment, and I like marking moments. He eyed the journal, touched it briefly, then pushed it aside. "You're determined to celebrate this, aren't you?" "I am," she said, unfazed. "And you're going to let me?" Errol shook his head with slow amusement. "Maye, what's to celebrate? Another year closer to being dust. Another ache, another wrinkle." Her response was gentle but firm. "Another sunrise, another story. That's what." He wanted to argue, but something about the tenderness in her eyes disarmed him. There had been many battles in their years together, but Maye always won the ones that mattered. Eventually, she coaxed him outside. "Come on, let's take the boat out. The lake's waiting." Reluctantly, Errol agreed. The small wooden rowboat, worn from years of use, bobbed patiently at the dock. Maye handed him the oars, knowing he preferred the feel of them, the steady rhythm of rowing. It reminded him, perhaps, of a time when his body obeyed him without complaint. The lake stretched out like a silver sheet, calm and endless under the wide morning sky. The quiet lapping of water against the boat filled the spaces between them as they drifted. They didn't speak at first. The silence was familiar, comforting like an old sweater. "Do you remember when Elon caught his first fish here?" Maye finally asked, her gaze tracing the water's edge. "He was what, 6? You told him to be patient. He caught it 2 minutes later." Errol allowed a small, reluctant smile. The boy never did know how to wait. Maye chuckled softly, her fingers trailing along the side of the boat. "Some things don't change." His smile faded, replaced by a distant look. "Lately, I've been having dreams. Nightmares, really." She turned toward him, attentive. "What kind of nightmares?" "Of being alone. Of disappearing," he confessed, his voice low. "I dream I'm here on this lake, but I'm the only one. No Maye, no children, no memories. Just me. The boat drifts further and further, and I can't row back. My arms won't move." Maye's heart tightened, but she steadied her voice. "They're just dreams, Errol. Shadows. You're not alone. You never have been." He shook his head, his eyes locked on the water's shimmering surface. "I don't want to become a burden, Maye. To you, to Elon, I've seen it happen to other men. They linger too long, and people start waiting for them to be gone." Her hand found his, her grip firm and warm. "You will never be a burden to me. I married all your years, Errol, not just the ones that ran fast." They sat like that for a while, rocked gently by the water. But the moment was interrupted by the sharp trill of Maye's smartphone. "It's Elon," she said, glancing at the screen. Errol hesitated before nodding. Maye answered with her usual brightness. "Elon, we were just out on the lake." The call was brief, polite but lacking warmth. Elon offered his congratulations, but his words landed awkwardly, like a well-meaning card sent too late. There were long pauses, strained laughter, and an undertone of distance neither of them addressed. When Maye ended the call, Errol's jaw was tight. Calls on birthdays. That's what the world has come to. He remembered, Maye said softly. "That matters." "He remembered out of duty," Errol muttered, "not out of heart." She didn't argue. Instead, she let the moment settle, knowing that some fences need time before they can be mended. Later that afternoon, Errol suggested they plan a small fishing trip for the next day. "Might as well catch something besides bad dreams," he said with a flicker of humor. They walked to the nearby bait shop, where Errol greeted a few familiar faces, though fewer than in years past. His old friend Charles had moved to Florida. Martin had passed away last spring. Time had thinned the ranks. Returning to the lake's edge, they paused as a soft, haunting call echoed across the water. A loon, its sleek black head breaking the surface as it glided effortlessly across the lake. "There's still one left," Maye whispered, watching the bird. "Not many stay that long," Errol replied, his gaze following the bird's path. "They leave when the season changes." "Some stay because they know they're still needed," she said quietly, her eyes lingering on him. The loon's call drifted over the water again, a sound both lonely and beautiful, and somehow, Errol felt lighter. That evening, after a simple supper, Maye sat by his side, humming a tune from their youth. She sang softly, her voice not what it once was, but still enough to fill the quiet house with something tender. Errol closed his eyes, not to escape, but to savor the moment. The lake, the loon, the song, the quiet weight of her hand resting on his. These, he thought, were the things worth remembering. The steady hum of tires against gravel announced Elon's arrival long before the silver car came into view. Errol Musk watched from the porch, his arms crossed, his sharp hazel eyes narrowing at the growing plume of dust. Maye stood beside him, her hands lightly clasped in front of her, her heart a tangle of anticipation and quiet hope. When the car stopped near the dock, Elon stepped out first, tall and composed, but carrying a restlessness that clung to him like an ill-fitting coat. He paused briefly, scanning the familiar landscape of Seasons Lake, as though bracing himself to step back into a version of life he had long kept at arm's length. From the passenger side emerged Susan Ray, a woman in her early 40s with an air of calm resilience. She wore simple linen blouse and jeans, her auburn hair tied loosely behind her neck. Her presence radiated warmth, but her steps toward the porch carried the weight of uncertainty. The first exchange between father and son was wordless, a glance that lasted just a heartbeat too long, charged with all the things they had never said. "Well, well," Errol said, breaking the silence with a faintly mocking drawl. "The prodigal son returns, and he brings a guest." His voice carried no welcome, only the thinly veiled edge of irony. Maye stepped forward quickly, filling the space with her practiced grace. She embraced Elon, then Susan, her touch lingering as if she could will the tension to dissolve. "It's so good to have you here," she said sincerely, her eyes searching Elon's for a flicker of peace. Elon's jaw tensed, but he managed to smile for her. "I wanted to introduce you both to Susan. She's part of what I hope is a new chapter." "New chapters," Errol muttered as he turned toward the house. "People love those. Usually means they're fleeing the old ones." Susan ignored the barb, stepping closer. "It's truly lovely to meet you, Mr. Musk." Errol stopped in his tracks and half-turned, his gaze heavy on her. "Call me Errol. Mr. Musk makes me sound older than I feel. Though I suppose that's accurate these days." Susan offered a polite laugh, but the crack in her composure was small and momentary. As Maye guided them inside, Errol trailed behind, his silence pressing against their footsteps. Inside the house, Elon tried to ease the air, telling stories from the road, mentioning places Susan had shown him, small towns they'd wandered through on their way to Seasons Lake. Maye listened eagerly, her eyes bright with the pleasure of having family gathered once more under this aging roof. But Errol soon interrupted the flow with one of his pointed questions. "So, Susan, what is it you do? I'm sure it's something noble. Everyone's doing noble work these days." Susan, ever composed, answered, "I'm a freelance landscape photographer. I specialize in quiet spaces, natural scenes that remind people to pause." Errol leaned back in his chair, his hazel eyes flicking over her, weighing her words. The art of standing still. Doesn't pay much, I assume?" Elon stiffened. "Dad." "It's an honest question," Errol said, lifting his hands in mock defense. "We can't all live on ideas and pretty pictures. Someone has to keep the wheels turning." Susan's smile faltered, but she kept her voice steady. "The photos aren't about money. They're about presence, about remembering what matters." Errol's lip curled slightly, amused but unconvinced. "Sentimental. Very fashionable these days." Elon's frustration simmered just beneath his skin. "Can you, just for once, try not to turn this into a contest?" Errol's gaze slid lazily to his son. "Try not to bring me people who expect to be coddled. Try not to drive everyone away," Elon shot back, his voice low but edged with years of stored resentment. Maye intervened with practiced calm. "How about we take the boat out later? The water's perfect today. It always helps to clear the air." Elon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to Susan and, with a softened tone, said, "I just wanted you to meet them. It matters to me." Susan placed her hand gently on his. "I'm glad to be here, even when it's complicated." Later, Elon confided in Maye as they walked along the lakeshore, the crunch of gravel beneath their feet anchoring the conversation. "It's always the same," he sighed. "I could climb every mountain, but I'd still be the boy who wasn't enough for him." Maye touched his arm gently. "You were always enough. He just doesn't know how to say it. Maybe he never will, but that doesn't make it less true." Elon's shoulders slumped under the quiet weight of her words. Back at the house, Errol remained distant, criticizing modern life in sweeping declarations, how technology disconnected people, how the world moved too fast, how everything now was artificial. Susan listened but sensed there was more beneath his scorn, a loneliness he wouldn't name. Maye persisted in her quiet mission, proposing simple activities, fishing, short walks, shared meals, as soft bridges between the past and the present. She spoke of the lake as though it still held space for healing, as though there was always time to repair what had frayed. One afternoon, as they all sat on the porch, Susan brought up her daughter. "Elon and I were wondering," she began carefully, "if Emily could spend some time here, just for a few days. She's 9, full of questions, and I think..." I think she might enjoy the stillness here." Maye's face lit with curiosity and warmth. "We would love that." Errol raised an eyebrow, his skepticism sharp. "Leaving a child here? With us?" "It's just while we take a short trip," Elon explained. "Emily's comfortable with me, but we thought maybe this would be good. For everyone." Errol hesitated, weighing the idea as though it were some fragile object that might break under his care. Maye spoke before he could object. "I think it's a wonderful idea." "She's a good kid," Susan added softly. "She doesn't need much. Just a place to ask her questions." Errol's gaze drifted out toward the lake, where the water glistened like scattered glass. "Questions, huh? Hope she's prepared for complicated answers." Elon smirked faintly. "Maybe you'll like this one." Errol didn't reply, but something shifted, almost imperceptibly, like the first ripple before the current changes course. When Elon and Susan departed a day later, leaving Emily in their care, the old house felt unexpectedly full again, the silence less heavy. And for the first time in a long while, Errol found himself wondering, not about the past, but about what came next. Emily Ray arrived on a warm afternoon, the kind of day when the lake glistened like a sheet of polished glass. Her small suitcase thudded against the porch as she stepped out of the car, her shoulders slightly hunched beneath her soft, sky-blue jacket. At 9 years old, Emily was already well-practiced in the art of distance. She scanned the house with cautious eyes, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as if to shield herself from what was to come. Errol Musk watched her from the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame, his posture as rigid as the old planks beneath his feet. His hazel eyes flicked over her, a child too old for childish games, he thought. She carried herself like someone who'd long learned not to expect much. "You must be Emily," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. Emily offered a small nod, her gaze falling to the worn wooden floorboards, uninterested in small talk. She'd been told by her mother that this stay would be brief, temporary. A handful of days spent with a man who didn't smile much and an older woman who tried too hard to make things feel soft. Maye, as always, stepped in with warmth. She knelt to Emily's level, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. "We're very glad you're here, Emily. Seasons Lake is a special place. I hope you'll like it." Emily managed a polite murmur, but clung tightly to the handle of her suitcase. The first days passed in an uneasy rhythm, marked by silences and the scratch of chair legs across the wooden floors. Errol imposed a set of rules, not out of cruelty but out of habit. Early mornings, limited time on devices, mandatory reading before supper. Emily obeyed, but her quiet resentment simmered just beneath the surface. "Books before dinner," he'd say firmly, tapping the cover of a thick volume he placed on the table. "You don't have to like it, but you have to do it." Maye worked gently to soften the spaces between them. She baked Emily's favorite blueberry muffins, introduced her to the peaceful walks around the lake, and spoke about the wildflowers in tones reserved for treasured secrets. Still, Emily kept a careful distance from Errol, offering curt nods and shrinking from his stern glances. One evening, as Emily sat on the porch reading under protest, Errol lowered his newspaper and said, "You ever fished before?" She shrugged without looking up. "No." "Makes sense," he grunted. "People don't fish much anymore. Too busy chasing things that vanish." Emily flipped a page without replying. "I'm going tomorrow," he added casually. "Could use an extra pair of hands." "I don't want to," she said flatly. "Didn't ask if you wanted to. I asked if you'd come." She looked up then, her brows knitted in confusion. "Why me?" He paused, setting the paper aside. "Because you're here, and because you might learn something." Her eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Like what?" "Like patience, and listening to things that don't speak." Emily turned back to her book, unsure how to answer. Maye gently nudged her later that night. "Your grandfather means well. He just speaks in crooked lines. Sometimes you have to tilt your head to understand him." The next morning, Emily appeared at the dock, arms crossed but present. Errol said nothing, only handed her a life vest and helped her into the small wooden boat that creaked under their combined weight. The lake stretched around them, wide and calm, its surface occasionally broken by the ripples of swimming loons. For a while, they rowed in silence, the oars dipping and rising in a steady rhythm. Emily watched his practiced hands, his weathered knuckles, the way he measured each pull without hurry. "Fishing's not about catching," Errol said, his voice low against the lap of water. "It's about waiting, about knowing when not to move." Emily peered into the water. "Doesn't sound like much fun." It isn't, not at first. But something shifted that day. As the hours passed, Emily began to speak, tentatively at first, then more freely. She asked about the lake, about the birds, about the strange way the trees seemed to lean toward the water. Errol answered, his words less sharp now, softened by the quiet surroundings. When Emily struggled to bait the hook, he showed her patiently, his large hands guiding hers with unexpected care. She caught her first fish that afternoon, a small, wriggling perch, and her delighted gasp made him smile in a way he hadn't for years. "That one's yours," he said. "We'll throw it back, but it's yours." They fished again the next day and the day after. The silences between them became less strained, filled instead with the comfortable weight of shared experience. They learned to trust each other in the quiet, to find understanding without explanation. Maye watched from the shore, her heart quietly swelling at the sight of them, two stubborn souls learning to fold into each other's space. One evening, as they sat cleaning their gear by the porch, Emily spoke with a softness that caught Errol off guard. "I don't really know my dad," she admitted, her eyes focused on the tangled fishing line in her lap. "He's around sometimes, but not really there, you know?" Errol stilled, his rough hands pausing mid-motion. His gaze lingered on her for a long, silent moment. "I know," he said finally. "I know exactly what that feels like." Emily glanced up, her eyes searching his. "Do you think I'll stop missing him?" He considered his answer carefully. "No, but it stops hurting the same way. You find other places to put the missing, like fishing, like here." His words settled between them, a simple offering. From then on, he treated her with less rigidity, inviting her into his routines without the heavy weight of rules. She, in turn, followed him willingly, asking questions, offering observations, laughing at his dry humor. The house changed with their bond. The walls, once thick with unspoken things, seemed to breathe easier. Maye's laughter filled the kitchen more often. Emily's voice wove itself into the fabric of the home, her footsteps echoing confidently down the hallways. What had begun as a reluctant arrangement slowly became something neither of them wanted to end. In each other, they had discovered not what they were missing, but what they had been unknowingly waiting for, a quiet, imperfect, but genuine connection. The summer mornings settled into a quiet rhythm. Each day, as the soft light spilled over the glassy surface of Seasons Lake, Errol and Emily Ray prepared their little wooden boat, falling into an unspoken routine that neither wanted to end. Emily had grown comfortable with the creak of the oars, the scent of pine on the breeze, and the steady presence of Errol by her side. The sharp edges of their early days together had softened, replaced by an ease that surprised them both. Errol, for his part, took quiet pride in her growing skill with the fishing rod. He would watch as she cast her line, her small hands steady, her posture attentive. She was beginning to mirror his patience. "You're getting good at this," he told her one morning as they drifted across a still corner of the lake. Emily shrugged but couldn't hide her smile. "Only because you're a good teacher." He chuckled, his hazel eyes crinkling at the edges. "I'm not much of a teacher. I just show up. The lake does the rest." But to Emily, he was more than a teacher. Slowly, she had begun to see him as something her life had been missing, a figure of steadiness, someone who didn't leave, someone who kept his promises. She never said the words aloud, but in the quiet of the boat, she looked at him the way a daughter might. Back at the house, Maye became part of their growing connection in her gentle way. One afternoon, as Emily helped her shell peas on the porch, Maye shared stories about Elon's childhood, how he would wander the woods for hours, how he once tried to build a small raft out of old fence posts. He always wanted to go further than the rest of us, Maye said softly, smiling at the memory. But even back then, he wanted someone to tell him he'd done well. I'm not sure he ever really heard that from his father. Emily listened carefully, her small fingers stilling as she absorbed the weight behind the words. He never got a good job, she asked. Not as often as he needed, Maye replied, her voice tender but edged with quiet sadness. Later that week, Errol surprised Emily by inviting her to take the oars. Want to try? He asked, his tone casual. Emily hesitated, gripping the sides of the boat. What if I mess it up? You will, he said plainly. That's how you learn. Tentatively, she positioned herself, her hands uncertain on the worn wooden handles. Errol guided her movements, steadying her through jerky starts and clumsy corrections. Relax your shoulders, he murmured. You don't fight the water. You move with it. Soon enough, Emily found her rhythm. She laughed when the boat veered off course, and even more when Errol pretended to panic as they spun in slow circles. Captain Emily, he declared, you're now officially in charge. Really? She beamed. Really, he confirmed. But you still can't drive the car. Each success on the lake chipped away at her hesitations. With Errol's quiet encouragement, she began to trust herself more, her world expanding gently beyond her usual fears. One morning, while Emily prepared the tackle box, Errol lowered his voice as though sharing a secret. There's a big trout out there, bigger than you can imagine. Been chasing it for years. Her eyes widened. Does it have a name? He leaned back, considering. Not yet. Maybe you should give it one. Emily thought for a moment. Milo, she said. He looks like a Milo. Well then, Errol grinned. Milo it is. And we've got a mission. From that day on, catching Milo became their shared adventure. They plotted strategies, adjusted their bait, and scanned the water with the seriousness of true hunters. It didn't matter whether they caught him or not. What mattered was that they tried together. Their bond deepened in those quiet pursuits, and one afternoon, as they drifted aimlessly, Errol's thoughts turned inward. You know, he began, his voice softer than usual, people think you stop being afraid when you get old. They're wrong. The fears just change. Emily set her rod aside and listened carefully. I don't like the idea of slipping away, he continued. Forgetting things. Becoming invisible. That's what I worry about. You're not invisible to me, Emily said firmly. Her words settled into him, sinking deeper than she could know. Besides, she added with surprising wisdom, you're the only one who knows where Milo is hiding. You can't leave yet. A quiet laugh rumbled from his chest. I suppose not. The house grew warmer with their companionship. Maye watched them with quiet joy, seeing the way Errol smiled more easily now, the way Emily laughed with abandon, no longer guarded. But time, as always, left its reminders. One afternoon, as they returned from the lake, Errol staggered briefly, gripping the edge of the dock as a wave of dizziness swept over him. His breath came short and his vision blurred. Emily's face paled in panic. Grandpa! Maye rushed to his side, steadying him as she helped him to a chair. It's all right, darling. Just a moment. Errol waved them off, brushing aside their concern. Just got up too fast. That's all. But Emily's small hands trembled as she held a glass of water to him. The thought of him disappearing had never felt so real. That evening, as Maye tucked Emily into bed, the girl's usual bravery cracked. Is he going to be okay? She whispered. Maye stroked her hair gently. He's strong, and he has us. That makes all the difference. Emily nodded, though the fear still lingered in her chest. Errol dismissed the incident, insisting he was fine, but Maye saw the fatigue he tried to hide. She had lived long enough to know what the body does when time begins to press in. Yet despite the shadow of that afternoon, the summer unfolded in simple, meaningful ways. They fished, they laughed, they pursued Milo with the urgency only children and the elderly can truly understand. There was something quietly extraordinary about those days, the way they stitched themselves into memory, not with grand gestures, but with the small, repeated acts of care and shared adventure. Emily no longer counted the days until her mother's return, and Errol no longer counted the days at all. When Elon and Susan returned to the house at Seasons Lake, the difference was palpable. The air inside, once heavy with silence and unresolved things, now hummed with a gentler rhythm. The house no longer felt like a stage for old battles. It had softened somehow, its rooms warmed by new laughter, by the light footsteps of a child who had quietly stitched herself into its fabric. Elon noticed at the moment he crossed the porch, his eyes sweeping over the space with a subtle frown, as if he couldn't quite place what had shifted. It was Emily who greeted them first, bounding out to meet them, her arms slightly sun-kissed, her freckled face alight with stories. She spoke quickly, recounting fishing trips and the big trout we almost caught, her words tumbling over themselves in excitement. But what stopped Elon was the way she looked at Errol, like he was safe, like he belonged to her now, in some undeniable way. Errol stood nearby, his usual stiffness softened, watching Emily with a faint glimmer of pride that he tried, unsuccessfully, to hide. He offered Elon only a brief nod, his eyes guarded but not hostile. Elon felt an unexpected twist in his chest, a mix of something sharp and something sweet. There was admiration, certainly, but also something else, something that unsettled him. Jealousy, maybe? He had spent a lifetime searching for that same look from his father and now found it offered, so easily, to someone else's child. As they settled back into the house, Elon struggled to shake the feeling. He watched Emily and Errol move through the space as if they had always belonged to each other, as if they had formed a secret language in his absence. During dinner, Elon's attempts to join the conversation landed awkwardly. He asked Emily about the lake, about the elusive trout she and Errol had been chasing, but she answered with her gaze turned toward Errol, her stories anchored to their shared adventures. Later that evening, as Maye cleared the dishes, she caught Elon alone in the kitchen, his shoulders tight, his hands still resting on the edge of the counter. "You're surprised," she said gently, reading him as only she could. "It's more than I expected," Elon admitted. "He seems different with her." "Maybe he's learning," Maye said, placing a clean dish on the rack. "It's never too late." Elon hesitated, his pride catching in his throat. "Doesn't bother you? That he can give her what he never gave me?" "It doesn't have to be a comparison," she said softly. "It can just be a new beginning." Maye urged him to speak with his father to try again, but Elon waved her off at first, retreating behind years of disappointment. Still, her quiet insistence lingered in his mind until, reluctantly, he agreed. The next morning, under a sky stretched wide and clear, Elon found Errol on the back porch, repairing a fishing reel. "Got a minute?" Elon asked, his voice carefully casual. Errol glanced up briefly, then continued his work. "Suppose do." Maye had arranged for them to be alone, believing, hoping, that silence between them had lingered long enough. They sat, the air between them taut with history. "I've been thinking," Elon began, the words stiff in his mouth. "When I was a kid, I used to wish you'd tell me you were proud of me." Errol's hand slowed, but did not stop. "I didn't believe in handing out words like that." "I know," Elon said, bitterness creeping in despite his effort to restrain it. "I thought maybe if I worked hard enough, I'd earn them." "I raised you to stand on your own," Errol said quietly, "to not need them." Elon's jaw tightened. "But I did need them." The weight of that confession seemed to hang heavily between them. Errol, usually quick to deflect, sat uncomfortably in the silence, the line of his mouth tightening as if struggling against something unspoken. "I didn't know how to say it," Errol admitted finally, his voice rough. "I still don't." "It doesn't have to be perfect," Elon said, softer now. "It just has to be honest." The conversation remained jagged, each man circling his own defenses, but something cracked open that day, a beginning, perhaps, of understanding. Later, as they sat in the garden, Emily Ray tugged at Elon's sleeve. "Why don't you go fishing with him?" Elon looked down at her, surprised. "Think he'd want that?" She smiled knowingly. He told me you used to fish with him. He remembers. Encouraged by her simple faith, Elon approached his father the next morning. Want some company on the lake? He asked, the question hanging between invitation and apology. Errol adjusted his hat, glancing toward the calm water. If you can remember how to bait a hook. Maybe you can remind me, Elon replied, trying to ease the tension with a faint smile. They rowed out together, the boat creaking familiarly beneath them. The air was quiet but not unfriendly, the kind of silence that invites patience. Elon fumbled with the tackle, his fingers less sure than they once were. Errol reached over, guiding his son's hands with a surprising gentleness, just as he had done for Emily. She's a quick learner, Errol remarked. So was I, Elon said with a soft grin. Their conversation unfolded slowly. No grand revelations, no sweeping apologies, just small steps, careful words, and the mutual effort to mend what had frayed. Errol offered quiet fishing tips, just as he had with Emily, and Elon, in turn, listened without the need to prove himself. As the sun dipped lower, Errol's rigid posture softened. He shared a story from Elon's childhood, an old fishing trip, long forgotten by Elon, but carefully preserved in his father's memory. You were stubborn, Errol said, a flicker of pride in his voice. You never wanted help. Elon smiled, a rare warmth settling in his chest. Guess I was just waiting for you to offer it. Errol said nothing, but his silence felt less like a wall and more like a bridge, fragile but real. From the porch, Maye watched them with tears quietly gathering in her eyes. She didn't wave or call out. She simply stood there, her hands clasped to her chest, knowing that this quiet rowing, this small exchange, was the kind of moment she had long hoped for. Not perfect, not complete, but finally something real. The morning unfurled gently over Seasons Lake, the water smooth as glass, interrupted only by the quiet splash of oars dipping into its surface. Errol and Elon sat side by side in the old wooden rowboat, the air between them lighter than it had been in years. No sharp words, no battle lines drawn, just the steady rhythm of the lake and the creak of the boat as it drifted lazily toward deeper waters. It had been years, decades even, since Elon had fished with his father, and though the silence was familiar, it no longer felt cold. There was instead a new kind of space between them, one that allowed room to breathe. Errol handed Elon a rod without a word. They worked side by side, their movements natural, their bodies leaning in time with the gentle rocking of the boat. After a long pause, Elon broke the silence. When I was a kid, I used to think catching the fish would fix everything. Errol raised an eyebrow, glancing at him. Everything? Yeah, Elon said, threading bait onto the hook. If I caught the biggest fish, maybe you'd finally say, "Good job, son." Maybe you'd see me. Errol's gaze dropped to the water, watching the delicate ripple of sunlight dancing on the lake's surface. You always thought you weren't enough. Elon gave a half laugh, half sigh. Wasn't I? There was no bitterness in his voice this time, just the honest ache of a question he had carried for too long. Errol adjusted his hat, taking his time to answer. You were always enough, Elon. I just didn't know how to say it. How could you not know? I wasn't taught how, Errol admitted, his voice rough but not defensive. I thought if I made you tough, you'd survive anything. I didn't understand you were already carrying more than I could see. Elon let his line fall into the water, watching the bait disappear into the shadows. You could have just told me you were proud. I was, Errol said quietly. I just didn't say it out loud. I thought you'd feel it somehow. Elon looked over, his eyes softening. I didn't, but maybe I can now. The old man nodded, his lips twitching toward something like a smile. It's not too late, you know. Some things still bite this time of year. They laughed then, the kind of shared laughter that rises from old stories and younger versions of themselves. They traded tales of childhood mischief, of clumsy first fishing trips, of Elon's relentless curiosity, and Errol's stubborn refusals to ask for help. The years that had once stretched between them like a river now felt more like a narrow stream, something they could finally cross. When they returned to the house, Maye was waiting on the porch with a light in her eyes that Elon hadn't seen in years. She had prepared a simple but special lunch: fresh bread, garden tomatoes, and grilled fish that Errol insisted was one Emily caught, obviously. Emily Ray beamed at the attention, sitting proudly between Elon and Errol at the table. She watched them closely, the warmth in her chest blooming as she listened to their easy banter. The cold distance she had once sensed was gone, replaced by something tender and still growing. Susan Ray, observing quietly from the edge of the table, caught the shift too. Later, as she helped clear the dishes, she turned to Errol and said, "You've changed." He tilted his head, a little amused. "That obvious." "It's a good change," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You've built something here. With Emily. With Elon." Errol shrugged, his weathered hands steady as he dried a plate. "Took me long enough." The next day, Elon and Errol made plans to return to the lake together, this time with no lingering hesitation. The air around the house felt different now, lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Before they set out, Errol looked down at Emily Ray and said, "You'll still fish with me too, right? Even if your mom's back." Emily grinned. "I'll come find you if you don't ask me first." Deal. That afternoon, as Maye and Elon sat quietly in the shade of the old pine trees, she rested her hand on his arm. "It's been a good summer," she said softly. "It's been life-changing," Elon admitted, his voice low with emotion. "You both needed this more than you realized." Elon's eyes glistened, and he gave her a rare, unguarded smile. "Thank you for never giving up on us." Maye squeezed his hand, her gaze distant, perhaps seeing all the versions of him, boy, man, son, folded into this moment. On the dock, as Errol loaded the small tackle box, he called out to Elon, "Well, we still haven't caught that big trout." Elon smirked, walking toward him. "You mean Milo? I think Emily's the only one who actually came close." "She's got the patience you never had," Errol teased, a spark in his hazel eyes. "Maybe I've found some now," Elon replied, grabbing the oars. "Besides, I hear some things still bite this time of year." As they pushed off from the dock, the familiar creak of the boat welcomed them, no longer a sound of the past, but of something new being built, slowly, imperfectly, but with intention. The lake stretched wide and open, the afternoon sun dappling its surface. For the first time in his life, Elon felt not like a visitor in his father's world, but like he truly belonged there. Not because he had proven himself, not because he had finally earned it, but because somehow, after all this time, they had both chosen to meet in the middle. And that was enough. The air that morning was crisp and electric, the kind of day that seemed made for possibility. Seasons Lake glistened under a soft blue sky, its stillness broken only by the occasional call of a loon. Errol Musk and Emily Ray stood side by side on the dock, their gear packed neatly in the boat, their mission set. Today, they would finally catch the great trout, Milo, as Emily had long ago named him. Errol adjusted his fishing vest and looked down at Emily, who was tightening the strap on her life jacket with quiet determination. "Ready for this, Captain Emily?" She grinned. "Let's bring him home." Maye and Elon appeared just as the two prepared to cast off. Maye carried a small thermos and a basket with snacks, her expression glowing with the quiet joy of watching something precious unfold. Elon's smile was genuine as he approached, sensing that today wasn't just about fishing, it was about the stubborn act of believing in another try. "You're really going after him today?" Elon asked, half teasing, half admiring. "Of course," Errol shot back. "You think I've been sitting on this dock all summer for nothing?" Elon laughed, shaking his head. "Good luck, you two." Maye leaned down and kissed Emily's forehead. "Have fun, sweetheart, and be patient." Emily smiled. "I learn from the best." The boat cut through the water smoothly, the oars moving in practiced rhythm. Errol rowed with measured strength, though Emily noticed him pause occasionally, catching his breath. She said nothing but tucked the moment away in her heart. As they drifted toward the deeper parts of the lake, their excitement simmered beneath the surface. The water sparkled around them, and the promise of Milo, the legendary trout, felt as real as ever. They baited their lines carefully, exchanging glances like co-conspirators. "This is our day," Errol said firmly. Together, they cast their lines, their movements synchronized as if they had been fishing partners all their lives. Minutes stretched into hours, but neither of them minded. Emily had come to love these long silences, the gentle creak of the boat, the occasional murmur from Errol as he shared tips and old stories. But then, just as Emily was reaching for another piece of bait, Errol's body suddenly tensed. His hand gripped his chest, his breath catching in sharp, uneven gasps. "Grandpa!" Emily's voice cracked, her rod dropping to the floor of the boat. His face had gone pale, his weathered skin ashen. "It's nothing, just a moment." But he faltered, his body slumping forward. "Grandpa!" Emily screamed, panic rising like a tidal wave. "Help! Maye! Elon!" Her voice pierced the still air, frantic and sharp. She shouted again, waving her arms wildly toward the shore. The boat drifted as she struggled to support Errol's weight, tears blurring her vision. On the shore, Maye and Elon sprang into action, running to the dock as fast as their feet would carry them. "Elon, take the other oar," Maye ordered, her voice calm but urgent as she quickly untied a small second boat. Together, they rowed out with determined force, reaching Emily's drifting vessel just as her arms began to shake from holding Errol upright. "He's breathing," Elon said quickly as he steadied his father. "Let's get him back." They guided the boats toward the dock, Maye holding Emily close as the child trembled against her, her sobs muffled by May's steady embrace. Once on shore, they carefully helped Errol into the house, settling him onto the couch, while Maye swiftly called for the local doctor. The waiting was long and heavy. Emily sat curled in a chair, her hands wringing the hem of her jacket. Elon paced the room, his nerves raw and exposed. When the doctor arrived, he examined Errol carefully, his brow furrowing with quiet concern. "It's a warning," the doctor said, his voice gentle but firm. "Nothing critical this time, but it could have been. He needs rest. No more overexerting himself." Errol, ever stubborn, brushed it off with a weak wave of his hand. "I just need to slow down. Doesn't mean I need to stop." But the weight of what had almost happened lingered in the room, tightening around them all. That evening, Maye tended to Errol with a tenderness that spoke of years spent loving him through both his best and most difficult days. She prepared a light supper, carefully watching his breathing, adjusting the pillows behind his back. Elon stayed close, sitting beside his father, seeing now, perhaps for the first time, just how fragile he had become. "You scared us today," Elon said quietly, his hand resting on Errol's arm. "I scared myself," Errol admitted, his lips curving into a faint smile. "Didn't think I'd come this close to the end while chasing a fish." Emily, sitting at his feet, looked up at him with wide, tearful eyes. "I thought you were going to leave." Errol reached down, his hand resting gently on her hair. "Not yet, kiddo. You and I still have some fishing to do." Maye smiled softly from the doorway. "You may not be allowed on the lake tomorrow, but you're certainly allowed to rest with your family." The brush with danger bound them all more tightly. They lingered over each cup of tea, each shared story, savoring every minute with newfound awareness. Later that night, as they sat quietly together, Errol broke the silence. "Maybe Milo was never meant to be caught." Elon smirked. "Or maybe Milo's just smarter than we are." "Probably," Errol agreed, a trace of his familiar sarcasm returning. "But I like the idea that he's still out there. Gives us something to keep reaching for." Elon looked at him, his voice steady and full of something rare. "We'll go back out when you're stronger. Milo can wait." Errol's eyes twinkled, tired but alive. "I'd like that." And in that soft, ordinary moment, hope lingered, not in the promise of catching the great trout, but in the promise of another sunrise, another chance, another quiet adventure together. The days passed gently as Errol settled into his recovery. The house by Seasons Lake, once filled with a lively shuffle of fishing trips and the eager scurry of little footsteps, grew quieter in the evenings. A new rhythm settled over them, a slower, more thoughtful pace, as if the house itself had begun to breathe in softer patterns. At night, the silence deepened. The low hum of the lake, the distant calls of loons, and the steady creak of the wooden porch became the only companions in those hours. The living room, once bright with afternoon light, now became a space for quiet conversations. Maye and Elon often lingered there after dinner, their voices low, their talks meandering between memories and the quiet acceptance of passing time. They would speak of Elon's childhood, of old friends now gone, of the years that had drifted by faster than anyone had expected. "You know," Maye said one evening, sipping from a small cup of chamomile tea, "I used to think there would always be more time, more summers, more chances to fix things." Elon sat across from her, his hands loosely clasped, his expression soft. "I used to think time would just wait for me to catch up." "It doesn't," she said gently. "It keeps moving, whether we're ready or not." In the quiet of his room, Errol lay awake, his door slightly ajar, listening to their words float through the house. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. Just hearing them, feeling their presence, was enough. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he belonged in the space between them, even if he wasn't speaking. Emily Ray visited him often during the days, sometimes in the evenings when the lake turned silver under the moonlight. She would bring him books, some of them stories, some just picture-heavy guides about birds and fish. She would sit cross-legged at the edge of his bed, reading aloud with lively voices and dramatic pauses that made him laugh. "Do you think Milo is still out there?" she asked one night, closing a book and peeking at him over the edge. "I think Milo's probably telling stories about the old man who couldn't catch him," Errol chuckled, his voice still weak but filled with playful warmth. "Maybe he's waiting for us," she whispered. "Maybe he is." Errol, softened by the weeks of reflection, shared more with Emily now, fragments of his boyhood, his first clumsy fishing attempts with his own father, stories about Elon when he was just a curious boy with scraped knees and impossible questions. "He was always chasing something bigger than him," Errol said, his voice drifting like the breeze from the open window. "Even when he was little." Emily leaned forward, her chin resting on her hands. "Like Milo?" "Yes," Errol smiled faintly. "Like Milo." Meanwhile, Elon and Maye had begun sifting through old boxes tucked away in forgotten corners of the house. They found photographs with curled edges, sun-faded maps, and wooden toys that had long lost their color but still carried the weight of memory. Elon paused over a photo of himself as a child, standing proudly beside a tiny perch he had once caught, his father's hand resting on his shoulder. "I don't remember this day," he murmured. Maye smiled. "He does." At night, Errol's dreams returned. Sometimes they were of the lake, vast and endless, his boat drifting far from shore. But the fear that had once clung to him in those dreams had softened. He no longer woke in a cold panic. Instead, there was a strange peace, as if the lake had accepted him, as if he no longer needed to race against time. One evening, as Maye adjusted his blankets and smoothed his silvered hair, Errol looked at her with quiet gratitude. "I was always afraid of being alone," he admitted. "You never were," Maye said gently, pressing his hand between hers. "You've always been surrounded by love, even when you didn't see it." In the living room later that night, Elon sat beside his father, the silence between them now comfortable. "I used to think we'd never find our way back to each other," Elon said, his voice steady but tender. "But I do now. I feel it." Errol's hazel eyes met his son's with unusual clarity. "I'm proud of you, Elon, of the man you became, of what you've built. I should have told you that sooner." Elon smiled faintly. "Took us a while, but I'm glad we're here." Outside, the lake shimmered under the pale glow of the moon, a steady reminder that life, like the water, continues to move, sometimes slowly, sometimes beyond what we can hold. Emily Ray, never one to let days pass without a new adventure, asked Errol the next morning, "Can you teach me to row properly?" Like you rode with Elon when he was my age?" He chuckled softly, his strength not what it once was, but his spirit undimmed. "Of course, Captain Emily. We'll start slow." With Elon's careful support, they made their way to the dock in the soft morning light. Errol's hands guided Emily's as she took the oars, her small arms determined, her focus fierce. "You're a natural," he said proudly. "You've got the patience, the rhythm." Elon and Maye watched from the shore, their hearts full, the moment stretching in quiet beauty. "We'll come back next summer," Elon said softly to his mother. "And the summer after that," she added, her voice laced with hope. Together, they began to dream of more seasons, more days by the lake, more stories yet to unfold. One afternoon, as Emily packed her books and fishing gear, Errol touched her hand and said, "I'd like to see you grow up, you know, to see the kind of person you become." "You will," she said with certainty. "We have plenty more summers." The house, once thick with silence and regret, now felt lighter, its walls holding not only memories but new laughter, new plans, and the quiet circulation of love that now moved freely, without hesitation. Time, they had learned, would keep moving. But now, they would move with it together. The days grew softer as August settled over Seasons Lake. The sharp urgency of earlier weeks had eased into something quieter, something more tender. Errol, still pale but stronger, began stepping outside again, moving with slow, deliberate care. Each breath of pine-scented air felt like a small triumph. His first venture was a short walk to the dock, Emily Ray at his side, like a loyal shipmate. Her small hand steadied his elbow, as if she had assumed the role of protector now. "One step at a time, Captain," she reminded him, her hazel eyes shining with quiet determination. "I'm not in a race," he muttered with a faint smile, though the rhythm of his steps spoke of pride in each one. Soon, they resumed their short boat rides on the lake. They moved slowly, content to drift along the surface like leaves carried by a gentle current. Maye often sat on the porch during these outings, watching from a distance, her heart full and quiet, her knitting forgotten on her lap, as she followed their path with softened eyes. Elon, inspired by the ease that had settled over the house, decided to prepare a family meal, his own quiet gesture of care. He spent the morning in the kitchen, focusing intently on every step, determined to craft something from his hands rather than his usual world of ideas and machines. Maye helped him navigate the old recipes, her patient voice guiding him through the familiar flavors of their family's past. When they gathered around the worn wooden table, the food was simple: fresh fish, roasted vegetables, a loaf of bread still warm from the oven, but it tasted like something far more meaningful. It tasted like home. Errol, seated comfortably at the head of the table, lifted his glass of cool lemonade with a steady hand. "I didn't expect to be here like this," he said, his voice low but firm, "but I'm grateful. For all of you. For this summer. For the second chances I never thought I'd have." There was no grand speech, no need for embellishment. The weight of his words hung gently over the table, settling warmly into each of them. Emily Ray smiled, her cheeks slightly flushed with the excitement of being part of something that mattered. "I'd like to come back next summer. Maybe every summer." Maye's hand trembled as she reached for her napkin, quickly dabbing at her eyes. "We'd like that very much." Elon, sitting across from his father, chose his words carefully. "You've always been important to me, Dad, even when I didn't know how to say it, even when I wasn't sure you'd hear me." Errol's hazel eyes softened. He nodded slowly, his reply almost shy. "And I've always been proud to call you my son. He hesitated, searching for the right weight of truth. "I didn't always know how to show it." A quiet understanding passed between them, then something firm and new, something they would carry forward without needing to revisit. Later, as the afternoon light turned golden, Maye and Errol sat together on the porch, a familiar comfort between them. She reached for his hand, her fingers lacing with his, as if they had done this 1,000 times before. "You're not afraid anymore, are you?" she asked gently. He thought for a long moment. "Less afraid. I know what's waiting, but I also know what's here. I didn't before." "You're surrounded by love," she whispered. "And when the time comes, that's what you'll carry with you." He squeezed her hand, his voice low, almost playful. "You'll have to stick around, you know. I can't do this whole growing old thing without you." "I'm not going anywhere," she promised with a soft laugh. "We'll grow old together." As if the day had planned it all along, the family made their way back to the lake for one more fishing trip. The mood was light, buoyed by the simple joy of being together. The sky stretched wide and kind above them, the air filled with the steady rhythm of paddles meeting water. Emily, Ray, and Errol sat together at the heart of the boat, their fishing lines cast into the shimmering lake. Elon and Maye floated nearby, their boat close enough to share laughter across the water. And then, at last, the long-awaited tug. Emily's rod bent suddenly, the reel clicking rapidly. "It's him," she gasped. "It's Milo." Errol steadied her with both hands, guiding her movements with patience and excitement. "Keep your grip steady. Let him pull, don't fight too hard." Their teamwork was seamless. They pulled, adjusted, steadied. And when the great trout finally emerged from the water in a flash of silver, both of them gasped in disbelief and wonder. Together, they reeled him in, their hearts pounding as the legend became real before their eyes. "He's beautiful," Emily whispered. Errol nodded, his eyes shining. "And he's free." Without hesitation, they made the decision, together, to return the fish to the lake. Errol gently lowered Milo back into the water, watching as the great trout vanished into the depths with a flick of his tail. "Some things," Errol said, "are meant to stay wild." Elon captured the moment with his camera, a perfect frame of Emily's wide-eyed joy, Errol's contented smile, and the shimmering lake behind them. It was a memory they would all carry forward, not because they had conquered something, but because they had shared it. As the sun dipped behind the trees, they lingered on the water, telling stories, laughing at the near misses, and remembering the early struggles of the summer. When they returned to the house that evening, there was no need for grand declarations. The house itself felt lighter, brighter, as if it, too, had exhaled. Simple moments had woven themselves into something lasting, something that didn't need to be chased or won, but simply lived. And in those simple moments, they had found everything they needed. The sky over Seasons Lake stretched wide and golden as the sun slipped toward the water. Errol and Maye sat together on the wooden porch, their chairs angled just enough to catch the soft warmth of the fading light. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. Some silences were meant to be shared. The summer wind brushed gently through the pine trees, carrying with it the scent of a lake, the memory of sun-warmed wood, and the quiet creak of the old house settling into the evening. Errol breathed deeply, his gaze resting on the shimmering surface of the water. "You know," he murmured almost to himself, "I never thought I'd feel this light at 80. Maye turned her bright blue eyes toward him, a soft smile touching her lips. "It looks good on you." "Peace." He gave a low chuckle. "Took me long enough to get here." "It always does," she said, folding her hands in her lap. Out on the lake, a small boat drifted gently. Elon and Emily Ray sat side by side, casting their fishing lines, their voices carrying faintly across the still water. They laughed together, light and free, their bond now firm and easy, no longer defined by what was missing, but by what they were building. Elon showed her how to steady the oars, how to let the lake guide them without rushing. Emily listened carefully, her gaze focused, her hands steady on the wooden grips. They didn't speak of the past. They simply made new memories, allowing the lake to be their quiet witness. By late afternoon, Susan Ray returned to the lake house, her presence gentle, her steps lighter than before. She watched Emily and Elon with quiet affection, then turned to Errol with a smile that no longer carried the weight of old uncertainties. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady with sincerity. "Thank you for taking such good care of my daughter." Errol nodded, his hazel eyes warm, the edges of his face softened by the weight he had slowly set down over the summer. "She's a remarkable girl. She's the one who took care of me." They exchanged a brief, respectful embrace, an unspoken truce, a bridge built where once there had been hesitation. Later, Elon and Susan walked slowly along the shore, their conversation wrapped in the easy quiet of two people who had grown in ways they hadn't expected. "She changed him," Elon said, watching the ripples on the water. "She changed all of you," Susan replied. Elon smiled faintly. "This summer gave me back my father, and maybe even a part of myself." That evening, as the house settled into a gentle hush, Errol sat at his old writing desk near the window. The pen felt familiar in his hand, though it moved slower now. He carefully folded a small sheet of paper and left it in a place Elon would find, a simple gesture for words too fragile to speak aloud. When Elon later discovered the note tucked beneath his coffee mug, he paused, his thumb brushing over his father's handwriting. He unfolded the paper slowly, his breath catching as he read the few honest lines. "You've always been stronger than me. Strong enough to chase your dreams, strong enough to forgive. I never knew how to tell you, but I've always been proud of you. You have courage I didn't. You have kindness I'm still learning. Love, Dad." Elon sat in the quiet, the weight of those words settling into him like something he had long awaited without realizing. His throat tightened, but his heart, at last, felt full. Later that night, as the sun's last light melted into the distant hills, Errol sat again with Maye, the same porch, the same lake, but something inside him had shifted. "I wish I'd learned to love better when I was younger," he confessed, his voice rough but honest. "I wish I'd known how to show it." Maye looked at him, her hand resting gently on his. "It's never too late to love with more truth." He turned his palm upward, threading his fingers through hers. "I don't want to waste what time I have left." "You aren't," she whispered. "You're living it." When the time came for goodbyes, Emily Ray hugged Errol tightly, her small arms wrapped around his chest, her face pressed against the fabric of his shirt. "I'll come back next summer," she promised, her voice muffled but sure. "You'd better," Errol smiled, brushing his hand gently over her hair. "I'll be waiting." Susan hugged Maye warmly, exchanging knowing smiles that needed no words. Elon and Susan loaded their car in a slow, unhurried rhythm, as if the summer didn't want to let them go. Before climbing into the car, Elon turned to his father and embraced him firmly, no longer the brief, distant gesture of earlier years, but something real and whole. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." Errol's reply was simple, his voice low but steady. "Come back soon." The farewells were long, filled with lingering glances and quiet laughter, each hug stretching into something that felt sacred. The house, once filled with years of strained silences, now hummed with the lightness of healed hearts. As the car disappeared down the winding road, Errol and Maye returned to the porch, the lake before them calm and familiar. "Everything looks more beautiful now," Errol said, his gaze softening as he took in the familiar trees, the glistening water, the sky brushed in pastel hues. "It's always been beautiful," Maye replied gently, "but now you can see it." Errol leaned back, his hand resting securely in hers. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think time was the enemy." "And now?" she asked. He smiled, his voice like the faint ripple of the lake. "Now I know, while we're together, time isn't taking anything from me. It's giving me this." The sun dipped low, painting the sky in amber and lavender, and together they sat in the soft hush of the evening, where words were no longer necessary, where presence alone was enough. The soft air of late summer had begun to shift. The mornings carried a crispness now, a gentle bite that hinted at the coming autumn. Seasons Lake, once bursting with the bright, urgent colors of summer, had softened into quiet golds and silvers. The days stretched a little shorter, the shadows lengthened, and the familiar hum of preparations settled over the lake house. Errol and Maye moved through the house together, folding away the season like careful archivists. They stored the fishing rods, packed the picnic blankets, and wrapped the small wooden figurines Emily Ray had scattered across the porch rail. Their movements were slow, not from sadness, but from reverence, a quiet acknowledgement of what this summer had given them. "It's funny," Errol said as he folded an old quilt, his hazel eyes lingering on the worn fabric. I never thought I'd find so much comfort in these simple things." Maye glanced over, her bright blue eyes softening. That's where comfort lives, in the simple things. Errol smiled faintly, pressing his hand over the quilt for a moment before placing it in the cedar chest. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived for him, a handwritten note from Elon. The envelope was slightly creased, the ink familiar. Errol sat at the kitchen table as the soft breeze stirred the curtains. His hands, steady now, carefully unfolded the letter. "Dad, I never expected this summer to change me the way it did. Thank you for letting me in. Thank you for teaching me things you probably didn't even realize you were teaching me. For a long time, I thought I was always chasing your approval. Now I know I was just chasing you. And this summer, you let me catch you. I hope we can have many more seasons like this. But even if we don't, I'll carry this one with me forever. With love, Elon." Errol read the words slowly, his breath catching quietly in his throat. He traced his thumb over Elon's signature, a small smile curving his lips, the kind that held both pride and regret, but above all, peace. Tears came, but they did not sting. They simply arrived, like the changing season, like something that had always been waiting to be felt. Maye entered the room, pausing as she saw him sitting there, the letter gently folded in his hand. She didn't need to ask. "He wrote to thank me," Errol said softly. "Not for the fishing, not for the house, but for finally letting him in." She crossed the room and touched his shoulder, her voice warm. "This place, Seasons Lake, it's always been a place of return, a place where we come back to each other." Errol nodded, his gaze distant but peaceful. "I see that now. I think I finally understand what it's for." As they moved through the final tasks of closing the house, they spoke of the years ahead, neither pretending they could hold on to time nor denying its steady passing. "How many more summers do you think we'll have?" Errol asked, his tone more playful than fearful. "Enough," Maye replied with certainty. He raised an eyebrow, a teasing glint in his eye. "Maybe enough for me to finally learn how to fish properly." She laughed, brushing her hand lightly against his arm. "And I'll be right there, waiting to see it happen." The next morning, before they locked the doors and folded the porch chairs, they took one last trip to the lake. The boat rocked gently beneath them as they drifted without destination, without urgency. The water was calm, the air cool against their skin, the world around them wrapped in a soft hush. Errol dipped his hand into the lake, feeling the cool ripple between his fingers. "I feel it now, he said, his voice low. "Love, it's in everything. The trees, the wind, the way the sunlight hits the water." Maye smiled, her eyes never leaving the horizon. "That's what keeps us upright. That's what carries us when time begins to wear us down." He turned toward her, his hand resting gently over hers. "Even when the days grow short." "Especially then," she answered. When they returned to shore, they stood quietly, their eyes lingering on the lake, as if memorizing its every curve and glimmer. They didn't speak of goodbyes. They simply stood in gratitude, knowing that leaving didn't mean losing, that the lake, like their love, would be there when they returned. As they made their way to the car, Maye paused, then reached for Errol's hand, holding it firmly as they walked together toward the winding road home. The house, now carefully tucked away for the season, stood silently behind them, its wooden walls holding the laughter, the tears, and the soft reconciliation of the summer. At the edge of the driveway, Errol paused once more, his gaze sweeping over the water, the trees, the porch where they had spent so many evenings. Everything looked the same, and yet everything had changed. The lake shimmered beneath the pale sky, calm and patient, as if waiting for them to return when the time was right. And in that long, silent look, something in Errol settled, something that words could never quite hold. The season had changed, but what mattered would remain. The city welcomed them back with its familiar rhythm, its morning bustle, its distant sirens, its quieter streets in the early dawn. Errol and Maye returned home carrying not just bags, but something gentler, something that lingered like sunlight pressed between the pages of a book. Seasons Lake had settled into them, woven into their bones, like a quiet place they could now visit within themselves. The house in the city felt different now. Its walls no longer echoed with the sharp edges of silence. The days moved with calm purpose, measured not by schedules or obligations, but by the simple joy of steady company. Elon continued to write letters, sometimes short, sometimes sprawling with reflections about his work, his travels, and most importantly, his thoughts about family. His handwriting, familiar and slightly hurried, arrived in envelopes carefully addressed, each one a small bridge that spanned the years they had once lost. Errol read every letter slowly, often twice, sometimes tracing the ink with his thumb, as though trying to hold his son's words just a little longer. He kept the letters neatly in a small wooden box beside his reading chair, where they rested alongside photos and quiet memories. Emily Ray wrote as well. Her letters were sprinkled with colorful drawings, crooked margins, and stories of school, her new friends, and her proud declaration that she had learned to tie the perfect fishing knot. She always ended with the same line, "I'll be ready to row next summer." Those letters stirred something in Errol. The man who had once kept his world small, who had greeted neighbors with little more than a nod, now found himself lingering in doorways, sharing brief, pleasant exchanges with people he had previously overlooked. Encouraged by Maye, he began attending small community gatherings, a local book club, a quiet church service, the occasional coffee morning at the park. He discovered slowly that the world was still waiting for him, and that it asked little, just his presence, just his openness. Maye watched his transformation with quiet joy. To her, it was not about grand gestures, but about the softness returning to his voice, the ease with which he now greeted familiar faces, the way he stopped to listen when someone else spoke. She organized small family gatherings, dinners where laughter circled the table, where new memories quietly replaced the ache of old ones. She made sure their home always had an open door, and a place set at the table for those who wanted to come close again. One day, Maye found a folded note tucked beside her teacup. Errol had written it in his careful, blocky handwriting. "Thank you for being the rhythm that steadies me. I see the world more kindly because you're in it." There would be more notes after that, sometimes in her coat pocket, sometimes by the window where she read in the afternoons. They became his quiet habit, his way of speaking love in the spaces where words had once failed him. Elon sent photographs from their last summer together, snapshots of the boat, of Emily Ray's wide grin, of the sunlight dancing on the water. Errol kept them close, often pulling them out just to look, his heart quietly warmed by their colors, their captured joy. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Errol turned to Maye with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking, maybe I should write it all down. The lake, the summers, the things I used to think didn't matter, but now I know they do." Maye's face lit with encouragement. "You should. Not just this summer, write them all. The good, the messy, the unfinished parts. Write them for yourself. Write them for Emily. Write them for Elon." "I don't know if I can write well," he admitted, his smile sheepish. "You don't have to," she said gently. "Just write honestly." And so he began. In a simple notebook with a soft leather cover, he started to tell the story of Seasons Lake, not as a fisherman chasing a prize, but as a man learning how to stay. He wrote about the sound of Emily's laughter skipping across the water, about Elon's careful patience at the oars, about Maye's steady hand that never let go. In the spring, another letter arrived from Emily Ray. "Can I come back this summer? I want to learn to roll like you. I want to catch Milo if he's still waiting." Errol laughed softly as he read it. "I think she's more ready than I ever was." "We'll get her there," Maye smiled. He began to make quiet plans, not just to return to the lake, but to perfect Emily's rowing stroke, to teach her how to find the rhythm of the water, to share the simple wisdom he had gathered not from books, but from living. Elon, in his next letter, wrote, "I've never felt closer to you than I do now. Funny how it took us so long to find each other." Errol held the letter for a long while before slipping it into his wooden box. "Maybe we didn't find each other," he mused aloud. "Maybe we just finally stopped running." He and Maye often talk now about growing older, not as a burden, but as a rhythm they could walk together, without rushing, without fear. "Growing older doesn't frighten me the way it used to," Errol said one evening as they watched the city lights twinkle from their window. "There's so much left, even when the time gets short." Maye reached for his hand, their fingers folding together like they always had. "We found a new way to be a family. One where love isn't perfect, but it's real." He squeezed her hand gently. "That's all I ever needed." And as the seasons began to turn again, they both understood the lake would always be there waiting. But more importantly, so would they. In the quiet hours before sunrise, when the city still whispered in sleep, Errol Musk sat by the small window in their living room, a cup of black coffee cooling beside him, and wrote. It had become his morning ritual, a gentle rhythm inspired by the stillness of the lake, by the soft memories that drifted back to him in the hush of dawn. The notebook, plain and sturdy, had been a gift from Elon. The cover was engraved with his name and the simple words, "Seasons Remembered." Errol had run his fingertips over the letters when it first arrived, feeling the weight of his son's thoughtfulness in the grain of the paper. Now, most mornings, he would fill its pages with fragments of summers gone by, of long walks with Maye, of the day Emily Ray had taught him, unknowingly, how to stay. His handwriting was slow, deliberate, as if each letter were a small promise to remember what once slipped past him unnoticed. When the sunlight finally crept across the kitchen tiles, Errol would set the pen down and step outside to tend the garden. He had taken to caring for it with surprising patience, his rough hands now familiar with the delicate roots of the flowers and the stubborn growth of the ivy along the fence. It wasn't Seasons Lake, but it was his space now, a place where he could still watch things grow. Maye joined him on most days, whether to prune the rose bushes or simply to walk to the nearby park. Their strolls became another quiet ritual, another small act of preserving what mattered. As they walked, they spoke softly, their conversations no longer weighed by the need to resolve old wounds, but lifted by the sweetness of shared stories and small, gentle plans. "I think the loons would like this park," Maye mused one morning as they paused by the pond, where a pair of ducks glided effortlessly. Errol smiled, the lines around his eyes softening. "Not as grand as Seasons Lake, but I suppose we can let them live here in our memories." They made a game of spotting them, loons that weren't there, pretending that the distant ripple on the pond's surface was one, that a sound from the trees was their call. It was a quiet joke that neither needed to explain. Letters from Emily Ray continued to arrive, her handwriting a little neater now, her stories filled with the bright urgency of childhood. She shared news of her school plays, of new friends, and always ended with the same familiar line, "I miss you. Tell Milo to wait for me." Errol's replies were steady and affectionate. He wrote with the same care he gave his garden, each sentence like planting a seed. One morning, he added a new invitation. "Next summer, I have a challenge for you. We'll row all the way to the center of the lake. Just you and me." He imagined her smile as she read it, the way her determination would flare. It gave him something to look forward to, a thread already tying him to the next season. Elon's letters came often, sometimes accompanied by photographs from his travels or thoughtful little gifts. The notebook had been the most precious so far, but each small gesture deepened the quiet bridge they were still building. Errol responded with simple, heartfelt notes, his words more open now. "Thank you for thinking of me," he wrote once. "Your care reaches me in ways I never expected. I am learning to see the world through your eyes, and I like what I see." Maye watched all of this unfold with quiet pride. She had always known Errol's heart was capable of more softness than he had ever let himself believe. Now, she witnessed it daily, in his letters, in his gentle tending of the garden, in the ease of his laughter when he read Emily's stories. Elon shared plans for another visit soon, promising more time, more shared meals, more quiet mornings like those they had treasured at the lake. The distance no longer felt as sharp between them. One afternoon, as Errol folded a letter from Elon, he looked at Maye with a glint of humor in his eye. "You know, I still can't say I'm good at fishing, but I've figured out how to be a good grandfather." Maye's laughter filled the room, warm and bright. "You've become very good at both, I'd say." Their days settled into the comfort of familiar things. They pulled out old board games they hadn't touched in years, games from the early days of their relationship. They played late into the afternoons, sometimes cheating playfully, sometimes laughing until they had to wipe tears from their eyes. The past, once sharp with regret, now softened around them, reshaped by the small rituals that stitched each day to the next. In his notebook, Errol began writing not just memories but reflections on what he had come to understand. He wrote about second chances, about how love sometimes takes the long road to arrive. He wrote about the beauty of learning to stay, about finding his family not in grand gestures, but in letters in garden soil, in Emily's persistent promises to return. One evening, as the sky folded into soft blue and the city lights blinked awake, Errol and Maye sat quietly on their porch. There was no lake here, no distant loon call, but the moment was complete. They watched the world slow, their hands resting together on the armrest between them. "This," Errol whispered, almost to himself. "This is the part one didn't know I was waiting for." Maye leaned her head gently against his shoulder. "It's always been here, Errol. You just needed to stop and see it." And there, in the simplicity of a shared night, they sat without need for words, content in the life they had shaped, in the rhythm they had chosen, in the rituals that now gently held them. Summer arrived once more, wrapping the trees in vibrant green and casting the familiar shimmer over the still waters of Seasons Lake. The air, warm and fragrant with pine, seemed to pulse with the quiet invitation of days that would unfold slowly, generously. For Errol and Maye, the return to the lake felt different this time. There was no hesitation in their steps, no heaviness of unresolved time. There was only eagerness, a soft joy that settled around them like an old, well-worn blanket. As they pulled into the driveway of the wooden house, the sound of laughter greeted them long before they reached the porch. Elon and Emily Ray were already there, waiting, their voices light and filled with the easy cadence of a family that had found its rhythm. Emily Ray was the first to reach them, her arms wrapping tightly around Errol's waist. "You're finally here," she beamed, her hazel eyes shining, her long light brown hair now brushing her shoulders with new confidence. Errol hugged her back, his heart swelling at how much she had grown in just a year. "You've gotten taller," he said, pretending to measure her against his side. "And stronger, I can tell." "Stronger than you," she teased, her smile wide. Elon embraced his mother warmly, then turned to his father. Their handshake melted into a firm, genuine hug, one that no longer felt like a formality, but something solid and real. "I've been looking forward to this," Elon admitted quietly. "Me too, son," Errol replied, his voice steady. Within hours, they had fallen back into their summer routines, their hands familiar with the feel of the fishing rods, their feet steady on the creaking dock. The air was filled with the soft rhythm of life returning to its sweetest pace. Emily Ray, never one to miss an opportunity to challenge, pointed at the boat with playful determination. "This year you're rowing better. I'll make sure of it." Errol laughed, a sound that came easily now. "Oh, you will you? I think I've got a few surprises for you this time." Maye watched them with a quiet, proud joy, her camera often in hand, capturing moments as they unfolded. Emily Ray skipping stones, Errol steadying the oars, Elon standing barefoot in the grass as the sun painted his silhouette in gold. Each photo was another stitch in the growing tapestry of their shared story. Though Errol moved with the carefulness of age, there was a newfound confidence in his steps. He no longer braced himself against what he could not control. Instead, he leaned into the sweetness of each moment, savoring the now without racing to the next. One evening, as they sat beneath the fading light, Elon voiced what was resting in all their hearts. "I hope we always find our way back here, every summer, together." Errol nodded, watching the sun's reflection ripple across the lake. "It took me a long time to understand that the lake isn't something to conquer. It's something to enjoy." Slowly, their days unfolded like a familiar song. They picnicked by the shore, where laughter mingled with the rustling of the trees. They shared stories from summers past, each memory growing warmer in the retelling. They fished, they rode, and they lingered in the quiet, content. But was the promise made the year before that lingered in Emily Ray's mind? One morning, she approached Errol with clear intent. Today's the day. We're rowing to the center. Errol met her gaze, steady and sure. Let's do it. Maye and Elon watched from the dock as the boat slipped away from the shore, Emily Ray confidently guiding the oars while Errol steadied their path. It wasn't a fast journey, nor did it need to be. They moved at a pace that allowed every breath to be felt, every ripple to be noticed. When they reached the center, Emily Ray let out a triumphant cheer. We did it. You kept your promise. Errol smiled, his hazel eyes glinting with the satisfaction of the moment. I told you I had a few surprises left in me. They fished quietly for a while, their lines drifting in the soft water. When the tug came, they worked together, laughing through the struggle, finally pulling in a shimmering, strong fish, a worthy catch. Without hesitation, they looked at each other and knew. We let him go, Emily Ray said softly. We let him go, Errol agreed. Together, they released the fish back into the lake, watching as it vanished beneath the surface with a graceful flick of its tail. It was no longer about what they caught, it was about what they chose to honor. Back on shore, Elon watched his father return, the image of him steady at the oars, the laughter of Emily Ray echoing over the water. There was no lingering ache now, no shadow of the past pulling at him. There was only peace, a peace he had never imagined possible between them. As the sun lowered in the sky, they gathered on the porch, sharing a simple meal, their hearts full. The air was light, the conversation easy, their closeness woven into every gesture, every shared glance. Errol sat back, surveying his family, feeling the steady rhythm of life humming gently around him. He no longer needed to fill the silence. The silence, he had learned, was where love often spoke the loudest. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who could just sit here, without rushing, without needing to chase something, he said mostly to himself. Maye, sitting beside him, reached for his hand, her touch familiar and constant. That's the beauty of it, Errol. You didn't have to chase it. It was always here. He looked out at the lake, its surface calm, its edges blurred with the soft light of approaching dusk. I've spent most of my life trying to catch something. But maybe this quiet, this family, this moment is what I was meant to find. He smiled, not the practiced, brief smile of obligation, but a full, contented smile that reached his eyes and lingered. And as the evening settled in around them, he leaned back in his chair, breathing in the scent of pine, the sound of the water, the low hum of voices he loved. In that moment, with the lake before him and his family beside him, Errol understood. Each new day was a gift, and he was finally ready to receive it. The soft rhythm of summer days settled over Seasons Lake like a familiar song. Errol Musk found his place in it each morning, at the small table by the window, where the sun would warm his shoulder as he carefully filled the pages of his notebook. It had begun as a simple record, a list of dates, names, places. But over time, it had become something else. With Maye's gentle encouragement, Errol found himself writing not just about what happened, but about how it felt. About the ache of years spent at a distance, about the unexpected joy of seeing his family gather around him, about the quiet peace that now lingered in his chest where once there had only been noise. Write your heart, Errol, Maye would tell him softly as she passed by, resting her hand briefly on his shoulder. That's what they'll want to remember. Not just the facts, but you. And so he wrote. He wrote about the first summer Emily Ray called him grandfather without hesitation. He wrote about the way Elon had laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years while they fished. He wrote about the sound of the loons echoing across the lake at dusk, a sound that once made him restless, but now grounded him. Elon became part of the process, visiting more often and helping his father sort through boxes of old photographs. Together, they built the notebook into something more, a living album where stories and images were woven together. They added captions, scribbled notes in margins, and slipped in folded letters and drawings from Emily Ray. Elon's hands were steady as he arranged the pages, but his voice betrayed his emotion. "You know," he said one afternoon, "I always wanted to see this part of you. Thank you for letting me in." Errol looked at his son, his hazel eyes softening. "I should have opened that door a long time ago, but I'm grateful I opened it now." One day, Errol quietly began adding something new, small handwritten notes addressed to each member of the family, carefully tucked between the pages. Notes for Maye, for Elon, for Emily Ray. Not grand declarations, but honest pieces of his heart. He wanted to leave behind more than memories. He wanted to leave pieces of himself that they could hold. For Emily Ray, he wrote, "You made me brave in ways I never expected. I hope you always row with curiosity, not with fear." For Elon, "I am proud of you. Even when I didn't know how to say it, I carried that pride with me always." And for Maye, the note was simple, "You have always been my home." Emily Ray, growing taller and more confident by the day, continued to be his loyal fishing companion. Their adventures were now less about the size of a catch and more about the joy of trying, the patience of waiting, the quiet comfort of each other's company. One afternoon, as they sat in the boat, Emily Ray looked at him seriously. "You know you're my real grandfather, right? Not just borrowed. You're mine." The words sat warmly in Errol's chest. He didn't rush to answer. He simply smiled, his eyes glistening, and gently ruffled her hair. "And you're my granddaughter. No question about it." Elon, sitting on the porch nearby, overheard their exchange and felt a deep, quiet gratitude settle within him. They had all traveled such a long road to this moment, and now the distances between them had finally softened. In those long, golden afternoons, Errol confessed to Elon something he had never spoken aloud. "I'm not afraid of time anymore. I used to race against it. Now I just want to walk with it, to enjoy what's left." Elon sat beside him, listening as the wind brushed through the tall grass. "You're teaching all of us to slow down." Maye and Errol's evening walks by the lake continued, their pace unhurried, their conversations sometimes lively, sometimes filled with comfortable silence. They paused often, watching the light shift on the water, watching Emily Ray and Elon skipping stones at the shoreline. One morning, Emily Ray surprised them. She led Errol down to the dock, where the boat now bore a small wooden plaque. On it, carefully carved, were the words, "Milo, our boat." Below it, in smaller letters, was etched, "Errol and Emily's summer adventures." Errol ran his hand over the letters, his throat tightening. "You did this." Emily Ray beamed. "I wanted you to know that this boat belongs to us. It always will." His smile was soft, his eyes full. "Thank you, sweetheart. It's perfect." Elon snapped a photo of the moment, a quiet treasure to tuck into the growing album. During one of their last evenings of the season, as the sun stretched low across the lake, Elon confessed, "These summers here, they've become the most valuable tradition we have. More than anything else." Errol's gaze lingered on the shimmering surface of the lake. The loons called in the distance, their voices familiar now, like old friends. "It feels like everything found its place, doesn't it?" "It does," Elon agreed, his voice steady. Later that night, Errol sat by the window, his pen steady as he wrote the final lines in his notebook. The house was quiet, the air warm with the scent of pine, and the faint sound of the lake lapping at the shore. "The love found its way," he wrote carefully. "It always does." As he closed the notebook, Maye approached and quietly took his hand in hers. They didn't need to speak. The silence between them was full and rich, carrying everything that words could no longer hold. They sat together in the soft hush of the evening, their eyes resting on the lake, where the last light of the day gently faded. There, in that stillness, they understood this was the legacy they had built. Not in the grand things, but in the quiet ones. In the summers, in the letters, in the boat, in the way they had learned finally to stay. The morning arrived gently, its pale light spilling quietly across Seasons Lake, where the water's surface was so still it seemed to hold the sky itself. Errol Musk awoke before the sun had fully climbed, the familiar weight of the summer air settling around him like an old friend. Today was a day he had promised, a final fishing trip with Emily Ray. He moved carefully through the quiet house, his joints stiff, but his spirit light. By now, he had learned to welcome the slowness of his steps. He prepared a simple breakfast, the scent of fresh coffee mingling with the faint pine from outside. When he stepped onto the porch, Emily Ray was already waiting, her hazel eyes bright with the joyful anticipation of their adventure. "You're late," she teased, though she had only arrived moments before. "I'm just making sure you stay humble," Errol shot back with a grin. His voice, though older now, carried the playful sharpness Emily Ray had come to love. Together, they gathered their gear, rods worn smooth from seasons past, the same small tackle box Emily Ray had carried last year, now adorned with new stickers. Their laughter wove between them as they remembered tangled lines, near catches, and the one particularly clumsy fall into the shallow water. From the porch, Maye and Elon watched the pair with quiet smiles. There was something tender in that moment, something neither of them needed to speak aloud. They simply stood side by side, hands resting on the railing, knowing this morning would etch itself into all their hearts. The boat slid easily onto the glassy surface of the lake, cutting a delicate line through its perfect stillness. The oars moved in smooth, practiced strokes, and soon the shore was just a soft outline behind them. The lake greeted them like an old friend, unrushed, patient, holding the weight of so many summers. As they cast their lines, Emily Ray turned to Errol, her expression soft. "You know, I think the best part of fishing isn't catching anything." "Oh." Errol raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "And here I was thinking you were here for the glory." She laughed. "I'm here because of you." The simplicity of her words settled over him like the morning mist. There was no pretense in her tone, no need for embellishment, just truth. For a while, they let the silence speak, the only sounds the gentle lapping of the water and the occasional call of the loons. The stillness wasn't awkward, it was rich, like a shared language they had both learned over time. "You know," Errol said eventually, his gaze on the gentle ripples, "I used to think life was about chasing something. Success answers time. But I don't think that's it anymore." Emily Ray listened, her small hands steady on the fishing rod. "I think it's about being present for the little things. The quiet mornings, the sound of someone's laugh, the feeling of rowing in rhythm with someone you love." Emily Ray nodded. "That's what I'll remember. Not the fish, not the boat, just us." He looked at her, his hazel eyes soft with something close to wonder. "You've always been better at this than me." She grinned. "Took you long enough to admit it." Their laughter filled the open air, unburdened by the weight of time. As the morning stretched on, Errol grew thoughtful again. "You know, Emily, all my life, I've been afraid of losing people. Afraid that if they walked away, there'd be nothing left of them." She let his words settle before answering, her voice steady. "But there is. There's always something left. The love stays. It doesn't disappear just because someone isn't sitting next to you anymore." He looked at her, really looked, and something in his heart settled in that moment, something that had been restless for decades. They felt a sudden tug on the line, a good, strong pull. Working together, they brought the fish toward the boat. It wasn't the largest catch, but it was beautiful, its silver scales flashing in the sunlight, its fight spirited. Emily Ray smiled, ready to reach for the net, but Errol stopped her gently. "Let's let this one go." Her brow furrowed, surprised. "But we finally caught one." "Exactly." His smile was calm, knowing, "We've had our moment. We don't need to keep it." She hesitated, then nodded, understanding. They lowered the fish back into the water, watching as it darted away, free. It wasn't about possession. It was about honoring the experience, about letting go. Their journey back to the dock was unhurried. They didn't speak much. There was no need. The rhythm of the oars, the sunlight dancing on the water, and the comfortable presence of each other filled the space between them. Maye met them at the shore, her bright blue eyes shining, her hands outstretched to steady the boat. She didn't ask about the catch. She simply smiled, as if she already knew. "Well," she asked softly. "We let him go," Emily Ray said, her voice full but light. "Good," Maye whispered, her gaze resting on Errol with pride. That evening, the family gathered around a simple dinner table. No fanfare, no speeches, just warm food, familiar faces, and the quiet celebration of being together. They laughed over old stories, teased each other over small details, and soaked in the presence of one another as if the evening could stretch on forever. Errol didn't feel the need to say anything grand. He had already written his last words in the notebook, his final entry sitting patiently between its leather covers. The love found its way. And as the sun dipped behind the tall pines, casting a gentle golden hue across the lake, Errol leaned back in his chair, watching his family as they laughed and passed dishes around the table. He felt no rush, no ache for what was ahead or what was behind. He was fully here, in the little things, in the simple joys, in the love that had quietly built a home around him. The last fishing trip wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, one that would live on softly in all of them. The last golden days of summer lingered like a soft, familiar melody. At Seasons Lake, the air had begun to shift, just slightly, just enough to remind them that time, even when sweet, must continue its quiet passage. Errol Musk stood on the porch of the lake house, watching the sunlight dance across the water's surface. In his hands, he held the well-worn notebook that had come to hold more than just memories. It now carried his story, his legacy, and the tender echoes of a life lived with open hands. Inside, Maye was gently folding linens, preparing the house for its yearly slumber. They had done this before, closed the windows, packed the baskets, locked the doors. But this time, something was different. There was a softness in their movements, not of routine, but of gratitude. Elon approached his father with steady steps, pausing beside him as they both faced the lake. There was no urgency in his voice, just quiet truth. "Thank you," Elon said, his hazel eyes fixed on the water. "Thank you for teaching me how to love without needing things to be perfect." Errol turned to him, his gaze filled with something new. Pride, yes, but also peace. "It took me long enough to learn," he murmured. "But you gave me the chance to try." What Elon didn't know was that inside the notebook, tucked carefully between its final pages, were 3 letters. One for Elon, one for Emily Ray, and one for Maye. Each letter held the words Errol couldn't always speak aloud, but had found the courage to write. Words about second chances, about loving through the cracks, about learning that being present was the truest form of devotion. Emily Ray was the last to hug him that morning. Her arms, though small, held him tightly as though willing him to stay just a little longer. "You'll be back next summer, right?" she asked, her voice bright but tinged with the weight of goodbye. "I wouldn't miss it for anything," Errol promised, ruffling her hair gently. "Your family now." She smiled, a real, full smile that only comes when you know you belong. Elon and Susan lingered on the porch, their bags already in the car, their hearts fuller than they had imagined when the summer began. "We'll keep in touch, Dad," Elon said, his tone firm. "No more waiting until the next season." Errol simply nodded, his eyes glimmering. "I'll be here, whenever you call." Maye and Errol moved through the house slowly, sharing the quiet ritual of closing it up. They covered the furniture, latched the shutters, and walked through each room, not to say goodbye, but to thank it. The house had held them gently during the summers when they didn't yet know how to hold each other. Their final walk took them to the edge of the dock, where the lake stretched out endlessly before them. The loons were still there, their silhouettes gliding effortlessly across the calm water. Errol watched them with a serene smile. "You know, Maye, I used to think time was something I had to beat, something that was always chasing me." "And now?" she asked, her hand resting softly on his arm. "Now, I think time has been kind to me." Maye's eyes met his, full of knowing. Time was kind because we let love catch up to us. The breeze was gentle, the sunlight warm, but not harsh. Everything around them seemed to exhale, as if the lake itself approved of their quiet understanding. With one last look across the water, they turned back toward the house, locking the door with a tender finality. Errol held the notebook close as they walked to the car, his steps unhurried. For the first time in his life, he was not chasing, not running from the weight of unfinished things. As he settled into the passenger seat, he looked at Maye, who was adjusting the mirror with calm precision. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. "Ready to keep going. No rush, no fear." Maye reached for his hand, her fingers warm around his. "Always together," she whispered. "That's the promise." They drove away slowly, their hearts tethered not to the house, but to the life they had chosen to build, patiently, lovingly, in the time that remained. From the distance, Seasons Lake remained as it always had, serene, expansive, quietly holding their stories. The loons drifted across the water. The trees whispered. The house stood waiting. And in the stillness, something sacred lingered, a silent reminder that love, even without grand gestures, even in the smallest rituals, remains. It lingers in the scent of pine. It echoes in the laughter of a summer gone by. It holds steady in the slow rhythm of oars slicing through calm waters. It finds its place like sunlight on aging hands. It stays quietly like the waters of Seasons Lake. Dear viewer, if this story touched your heart, I'd love to know. Leave in the comments a memory that this story awakened in you. I read and respond to each one with care.